Good morning, lovely Ian. It is so nice to be here with you, even though it is wet outside. Even though it's so wet, it's probably the best place to be in here on a call.
I think so. It's wet here too in Sussex, and yeah, you can hear the wind howling down my chimney here.
Yes, it's not the nicest of days. So the perfect day to be inside having a conversation. So this is one of the conversations for my 60th birthday. And I was just saying before we jumped on here, we've known each other for quite some time, but we haven't actually had many conversations like this. We haven't actually sort of sat down in this way and had many conversations. So I thought it would be really, really nice to have a catch up. And potentially, I would really, really like to start with, what are you seeing fresh at the moment? Like if someone like me came along and asked you a question and said, right, we've been around this understanding quite a long time, what's really fresh for you at the moment? What are you seeing? What would you love to share with me?
Okay, well, nice opening question, I think. It's funny because one of the things that it's fresh, but it's not fresh. And I think that's often the case. I feel like I'm revisiting a few different themes at the moment, which are not entirely new to me at all. They're things that have interested me and been part of my work for a long time, but I feel like I'm revisiting them again, after a period of maybe being distracted by other things. I don't know. One of them is the homeopathic world, which, as you know, was my background long before I came into the three principles. I trained as a homeopath. I worked as a homeopath for many years. I used to run a homeopathy training school. I was well known in that field. And when my work moved more into the direction of emotional and psychological healing, and then that led me into the principles, in some respects, I kind of thought I'd left that world behind. I was no longer practicing as a homeopath. I was no longer training homeopaths and so on. And now, bit by bit, homeopathy's kind of seeped back into my life in different ways. One way is people who I've known through homeopathy coming onto my three principles trainings now. So there's a bit of cross-fertilization happening there, which is nice. And also, I keep getting invited to go and speak to groups of practitioners and students at different homeopathy schools and what have you. And that's also really interesting. So I'm curious about the relevance of this for not just homeopaths, but health practitioners, and the significance of it, and how it really is a game changer for anybody who's looking to be of service, let's say, in a helping role. I'm just seeing freshly how it's like a no-brainer, It's like, if you know this, it's going to make your work life so much easier, because it just takes a lot of the unnecessary stress out of the equation for the practitioner. And B, it's going to give you something that you can bring into your practice, into your work, that you can actually share with your clients if you want to. You don't have to, but you can actually impart it to your clients in a way that makes sense to you. And that will be a game changer for them. It might turn out to be even more impactful than what you thought they were paying you to do. And that's something that I've already heard from some of the practitioners that have started to get interested in it. It's like they just drop it into their homeopathic consultation, and lo and behold, the person has an insight about their well-being, and who knew, so that's lovely to hear. That's one of the things that as I say, it's fresh but not fresh, but I'm just seeing again how valuable this is for anybody who's in that kind of a service-oriented role in a healing arts, the helping professions. I think this ought to be, to me, it ought to be the foundation of that work, no matter what form that work takes. Yeah.
Yes. So there's a couple of things in that I heard that I would like to sort of pull out a little bit. So in the same way as you, I think when I came across the principles, I think because, this is what I hear in what you're saying, to me, it feels like the principles, a spiritual understanding of who we are is the most important foundation we can go and do anything from. And I think if we are trying to do other things without that foundation there, those other things, they're going to fall down somewhere at some point. And because, there's holes and our foundations aren't firm, so something's going to fall down one of those holes. But if we build it on those foundations, and I know what's happening for me at the moment is a little bit like you, I came across the principles and it almost the words like throwing the baby out with the bathwater are going around in my head, but it kind of felt like, right, oh, so this is it. So I'm just going to throw away everything else. And now where I've come to, it sort of looks like, again, this is the foundation. So it was maybe a good idea to put that to one side, to build those foundations to get that. But actually, I love being human. It's quite, I love going to principles things and getting into a great feeling and that. But what now? What do I do with this great feeling? There's there's this world out there. I don't want to just sit and meditate all day, every day, and, contemplate my toes and my navel. I love being human. I love creating stuff. I love, being in relationships, working out how they work, seeing it. I love building things and, business, whatever. I love to do that. So although it's maybe sounds like it's different words, but it's the same. Yeah, I think it is. What I heard in what you're saying and what I'm really seeing for me is I've got that. I've really looked in that direction. I feel like I have a really nice grounding, a really good foundation in that. Now I want to do something with that. I want to, and exactly like you say, I love being in service. I love being in, and it is so much easier, so much more rewarding, so much, everything about it is so much better having that foundation. So yeah. I love that. Would you, is that what it is, do you think?
Absolutely. And I like that in your response, Debs, what you said, what you pointed out to straight away is the fact that this is a spiritual understanding. So it gives us a spiritual foundation, without which anything else that we're trying to do at some point will come unstuck. There'll be there'll be a hole in it somewhere, or we'll come unstuck, basically. I
was thinking foundations and seeing this building all go down the hole in the, because we haven't got it. Everything we've been building is just going to fall down in this hole. So
that's it. And there's many different forms that unstuckness can take, right? So in the context of practitioners, for example, some people come unstuck at the stage of, well, how do I find clients, or how do I charge money, and get over that idea that it's difficult to make a living doing what I want to do. Whereas other practitioners, I mean, I had the opposite problem. I was really successful as a homeopath, so I burnt myself out. I didn't have a problem attracting clients or charging a fee. I had a problem of saying no and turning things down that I didn't really need to be doing, right? But actually, from a principles understanding, it's the same problem.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
If you go far enough upstream, you start to see that whatever form your unraveling takes, you can track it back to the same source. And that, to me, is what's so potent and simple about this. So it doesn't matter what the starting point is. So I had a dear friend and colleague join me on my last London training, who we trained together as homeopaths, like over 35 years ago, and had barely seen each other since. Now she's at the point where I was about 20 years ago, burnt out homeopath, basically. I just want to pack it all in. I can't do this anymore, And she heard something in a talk that I was doing, so she decided to come and do principles training with me. And it's just been beautiful, because to see that shedding of what feels like a burden, where you're doing something that you once loved, and now it starts to feel like you're feeling the weight of it. And so it erodes the enthusiasm and the passion for it. And it starts to look like the only possible solution is to pack it in. You've got to retire from this. And you know what I mean? It's like there doesn't seem like any other viable way to go. And yet, in a relatively short space of time, when that person's able to see that actually they're just living in a fog of thought and made up ideas about what they think they should be doing and how they have to be in this role, when all of that fog starts to clear, it's just amazing. My friend, she's had many people say to her that she looks like 10 years younger, and she does. Because of the weight of all of that thought, it's just unnecessary baggage that we're carrying. And so, to see that fall away, then what happens naturally is the person really discovers the love of the work. Now, the work might take a different form now. It's probably going to be a lot easier than what they were doing before, a lot simpler. Usually that's the case. but the original impulse, it's like the embers of that somehow come back to life, and the person reconnects to their original passion, and they still have the desire to serve humanity and, you know, the love of the healing work that they were doing, and it's no longer contaminated by all of that unnecessary stress. So to me, that's just such a lovely thing to witness and be a part of, you know. And I see so many practitioners or potential practitioners who haven't come across this, who are just lost in the struggle, you know, in their own version of the struggle. So I'm seeing that that's still part of what I can contribute because of the, you know, the associations that I have. People know me through those different roles that I've had. So it's just making more and more sense to me now to share it with them.
Yeah, and I know earlier on you said, I think it should absolutely be, everybody should know this before they go into a service-based anything. I think, you know, wouldn't it be amazing if there was a way for everybody to know this, whatever they were going to do? Because you know, there is a point, a resonance within us that we do know this. You know, as soon as one of the reasons why it starts to make sense to us is because there is something, it wakes up something in us that we already know. Like, you know, we're not adding something, we're not telling people, we're not putting something into somebody that isn't already there. It's like, oh my gosh, yes, that is so true. Which is why I think it's also important for lots of different people to talk about it in ways that make sense to them. Because I think for me as well, one of the things that happened to me on my journey was I went into this place of thinking it's only the principles, only in this way, only these people, only, you know, this again, you know, throwing away so much of what is valuable and beautiful out there. But as I said, you know, we're pointing to a spiritual understanding of who we are that is really quite, certainly it is very narrow and small, but incredibly deep. And so many different people point to it in so many beautiful ways. But if we have that, then what we do from there on top of that becomes so much different out in the world, doesn't it? And it can be absolutely anything from parenting, being in service, you know, in whatever way that we are being human. So yes. I would really love to, I know one of the things that used to frustrate me a bit when I watched webinars like this, it was like, okay, so you keep saying this understanding, this thing, can you just give me something, please? What? Don't keep skirting around and pointing. What are you pointing at? So, you know, can you share a little bit about what is it? What is this foundation thing that you think is going to be the difference that makes the difference to somebody being, you know, doing their homeopathy, doing whatever it is that they're doing, and then actually doing it from somewhere, I don't know, blowing it out the park because of what they have and this foundation that they have.
Yeah, it is kind of slippery in some sense, and I think partly that's because of the nature of it. We're pointing to something that is before form, let's say. So already it becomes nebulous. It's like, what is that? But I think the other way that I've come to think about it is like, and this is actually going to be the theme of my talk at the Viva event later this year. I don't know if you'll be going to that, but
I'm actually not going to Viva, but Lou and Beck are, and I'll definitely put a link under this to Viva just in case.
Yeah. So they asked me what I'd like to speak about, and one of the things that I've been kind of playing with as an idea for a while is thinking of the principles as like a multifaceted jewel. Because for most of us, when we come across it, we see a facet. You know, we get insight, for example, about the nature of thought or how we're living in thought-created experience. It's like, oh my God, you know, this is the most amazing thing. It's like suddenly, you know, the whole thing makes sense that didn't make sense to us before. And we kind of initially think that's it. And then after a while, we kind of settle down a little bit. And then maybe in another conversation, or I don't know, watching something like this or reading something, or just through our own insight, we suddenly get a glimpse that there's another facet around here, which seems to be opening up another door completely. And you know what? There's another one over here. And there's quite a few that are completely hidden from view. And I love that about it and I think that's why people can stay in this field for decades, as you know, some of the people that we've learned from have, and yet they still have this freshness and this enthusiasm. They're still seeing new facets even now. They're still catching those glimpses. So for me, what if you say, well, what are the main kind of features or facets that people might catch a glimpse of? One has to do with how our psychological and emotional experience is created through what Sid Banks called the power of thought. And why is that a game changer? Well, it's a game changer because if we don't understand that, or we don't have an insight about that, it tends to look to most of us as if the world is doing it to us in some way, shape, or form. You know, in other words, the way that we feel and the way that we experience life is just happening to us because of outside circumstances, other people, the weather.
I mean, come on, do you know what the weather's like today?
There's no end of things that we can point to and say, that's the reason I'm having a bad day, or that's the reason I feel stressed or distressed or upset or depressed or anxious, and you name it. And for someone to catch just a glimpse of the fact that, oh, wait a minute, sometimes the weather's like that and it doesn't bother me. How does that work? How is that possible?
Yeah.
Given that I've been attributing my, my feeling state to that, and then suddenly I realize actually it can't be that, because right now I'm fine and that's still happening. And then like a little chink opens up. It's like, so what's really going on? What was it that was really creating that felt sense within me? It must have been something inside of me. So that's one facet, that it just opens up that whole exploration about how our experience has been created. There's another facet which to me was a game changer, which we refer to as innate well-being, which I kind of knew, but I didn't really know it in my bones,
Yes.
The fact that everybody is always okay on the inside, no matter what.
That was the thing. That was the thing that blew me away. That I first, and it is interesting how we see these. Like I absolutely love that description. That the facets of that. It's yes, and I can see. This whole conversation is about. We see the same facets again and see more, like when you think, I'm picturing this jewel in and I'm seeing things and I glanced at it and thought it was really beautiful. Now I'm coming back to look at it again. I'm going, wow, oh my gosh, I only saw this first time. Look what else. So even the facets themselves have so much more depth and beauty and goodness knows what in them. And then, so my first insight was I really thought that I had damaged my children. What I had done and the actions I had taken as being a terrible parent had damaged my children, and there was nothing that I could do about that. And I was even told that by some really, really well-meaning people, and not it wasn't a judgment in that sense, but it was like, your children are going to only be able to, we're going to teach them coping mechanisms, to deal with the trauma that they've been through. They will always be traumatized, blah, blah, blah. And it was like, and the very first thing, and it is strange because it was like catching a glimpse of a beautiful diamond, and it was like, what? And then when I tried to find it and tried to see it and tried to do it, but it had done exactly that. It had chinked something in me. It was like, no, I just know that isn't true. And I couldn't have even told you how I had just seen this facet, this chink, this thing. And it was like, there's something more here to look for. So the magic, the beauty of being a part of this conversation and seeing something like that is just, the impact of it is massive. That was in 2011, and I look at my, thinking about them today, where they are and what they're doing and what's going on in their world and what's going on in mine. That tiny glimpse of that facet has completely changed everything that's going on for all of us.
And it will do it for anybody who gets a glimpse of it. I've seen it so many times now. Even if that's the only thing the person gets a glimpse of, actually it's enough. It's enough, because it'll continue to open and deepen, and say, over time. From then on, it's just a journey of confirmation and deeper realization of that fact that we are always intrinsically okay. Actually, I had an insight about this. There's another facet, you see. For me, the first insight I had was about insight. Kind of funny. Well, I heard Sid Banks talk about insight as being the only way that we can really understand this. You can't understand it through your intellect. You have to have your own insight. You have to have your own realization about it. When I heard him say that, suddenly that made sense of a whole bunch of things that had been puzzling to me. Like, why was it that I work with clients sometimes and I'd work really hard over a long time and it feels like we're getting nowhere.
Oh.
There'll be other clients where we just sit down, we're having what feels like an informal chat, and they go, "Oh my God, Ian, that was amazing." And I'm like, "What?" And they're thanking me for this conversation that's changed their life. And I'm scratching my head wondering what I did. And what I hadn't understood at that point was this one had an insight. The other one, where we're working hard, pushing a rock up a hill, they didn't have an insight, that's all. It doesn't have anything to do with the technique I was using or, even my skill as a facilitator. It all boils down to what the person sees for themselves or doesn't see. And it's like that just took such a weight off my shoulders as a practitioner. It's like, oh, it's a different game now. The practice really is just, well, how do we create the conditions which are fertile soil for insight to arise? That's all we have to do. And it turns out we know how to do that naturally. Basically, we relax. we
relax and enjoy life. Cool.
We stop thinking about whatever we think the problem is, and lo and behold, something comes to us. We all know that's how it works, right? We've all said, "Let me sleep on it." I can't decide now, let me sleep on it. Why do we do that? It's not the magic of sleep, although sleep is magic. It's not that. It's the fact that we just put it out of mind. We stop thinking about it with our intellect for a while. That creates the space for insight to come in. It's really simple. When I was driving down to Devon last time, I do the thing at Dartington.
Yes.
With that.
I might know some of these stories. Beck might have shared some of this, but carry on.
So my car broke down on the way. I got as far as Southampton, and well, I'm driving along the motorway, and suddenly I've got red warning telling me, and it's one of those. It says stop now. Says there's an electrical charging fault or something, and it's like basically stop. So I thought, well, the car's still working. Do I really need to stop? And I was noticing how unfazed I was by this. There might have been a time where I was like, geez, I need to stop. I was just watching it. And then I was just kind of checking in, saying, well, car's still going. I noticed the AC wasn't working anymore, but the fan was still blowing, but the AC had gone off. So it was getting hot. It was when we were still having a heat wave,
Warm. I remember warm, yeah.
So I just kept driving till I reached the services, and then I stopped. And then I called the guy out, and the guy diagnoses a broken belt, which he didn't have, so he couldn't replace. So he's going to have to send a tow truck out. They're like, okay. So I'm texting Claire saying, hopefully I'll get there at some point, And she's like, oh, don't worry, at least you'll have a good story to tell, Eventually the tow truck guy comes out, and it's the end of the day for him. It's late afternoon. It was 30 degrees that day. It was really, really hot. And the poor guy, he's sweating profusely. He's got a big bottle of water. And I get in his tow truck, which has got no AC. And he says, where are we going? I said, I don't know. I said, I need to get to Devon, but it's probably not a good idea to bring my car to Devon. I've tried to get it into a local garage. They're all booked up for weeks. No one will take it. I said, I'm a bit out of ideas. I don't really know. And he just looks at me and he says, I tell you what, he said, why don't we just sit here for a few minutes until one of us thinks of something? Which I thought was brilliant. I thought, this guy understands how the mind works.
That's amazing.
Right? Instead of trying to rack our brains and, drive ourselves nuts, he says, why don't we just, and we both just sat there with our bottles of water. He says, why don't we just sit for a few minutes? One of us will think of something. And then after a few minutes, he goes, I know, I'm going to ring my mate, Tony.
Tony, yeah.
And he rings his mate, Tony, and Tony tells us about a little garage that he knows of, which my driver had never heard of. It's about 4 miles from where we're sitting. And so the guy says to me, he says, Tony recommends this garage. Do you want me to bring you there? I said, sure, if Tony recommends, good enough for me. So he drove us to this little backstreet one-man workshop, and this lovely gentleman took my car, the other guy drove off, and I couldn't get a hire car for love nor money. It was getting late in the day. They were all closing, or they didn't have any left or whatever. And he sees me making all these phone calls, getting nowhere. This is the owner of the little garage. And he just comes up to me and says, "You need to get somewhere, don't you?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Devon, actually, it's miles away." He said, "Don't worry." He said, "I'll lend you a car." Just like that. I said, "I'm willing to rent." I'm looking to rent a car. He said, "You don't need to rent a car. I'll lend you a car. It won't cost you anything." It's like, okay. He just gave me the keys to a car. And it all worked out. And thanks to Tony, thanks to the driver, thanks to the tow truck guy, having the wherewithal, somehow he knew intuitively that when you're feeling just frazzled and hot and stressed out and you don't know what to do, the best thing to do is just to let your mind settle and let something come to you from what Sydney Banks called universal mind, that deeper intelligence, and it will probably be the right thing, because it always is. You know, and so to me, the practicality of this is that's where you discover how practical. You know, it can look and sound nebulous and vague or whatever, but it's so practical because it helps you out of a fix when you don't know what else to do. There's always something that you can fall back on, and it will not let you down. It will guide you in that moment, or it will at least tell you, you just need to sit tight for a little while. You'll know when you know.
I have always loved the absolute practical nature of this. You know, I love sitting and having deep and meaningful conversations, and you know, all of those kinds of things. I absolutely love it. And I do think, you know, being in a room and having conversations and looking at the nature of thought and looking at towards mind and consciousness, all of those things, I think it is really rewarding and it is beautiful. I absolutely love doing it. But definitely what piqued my interest and what really got me looking deeper and looking in this direction and wanting to know more was the absolute practicality of it. When, you know, the situation I was in when I first came across this, you know, I'd got my children were older. They weren't young children, teenagers and older teenagers, but you know, they're actually more difficult. You need more of that mind when you've got teenagers. But it was like so practical when it was, you know, when I would get into that state and think, I need to have the answer to this and I need to know, and something has to happen and I need to do something and I need to do it now. And all of that thinking was getting in the way of me just being able to do what needed to do next, and being able to access that. Okay, just let go. You don't need to hold on to this quite so tightly. Let's see what comes next. And I really began to see that like you say, what Sydney Banks calls universal mind was always there for me, giving me something. And it wouldn't give me what I've got to do next week or next month or those kinds of things, you know. And if I was getting into that kind of thinking, it might, I mean, sometimes it might, if it was, but it was like, it was of the moment. It would put words into my mouth. It would have me taking actions that sometimes just look ridiculous even sometimes, but it's like, yeah, just gently do this. And the more that I learned to trust and follow that, the more that I would see, exactly like the story that you told, instead of getting into a space of, oh, I've got to be in Devon, I'm going to be really getting into your head about how this shouldn't happen, your car shouldn't break down, it shouldn't have happened then, and blah, blah, whatever it is our head does. But the total practicality of, okay, this is what is, I have this intelligence. I mean, it almost sounds ridiculous sometimes. I have this intelligence. Let's just take a sip of water and wait and see what happens.
Yeah, it seems like nothing, and yet we could actually live our life from that trust. You know, if we learn that that's actually just how it works, and that it is, as you say, always available, it's something that we can always fall back on, then the more that we trust that, the more we discover that we can actually live life from that place. And that in itself, by necessity, takes all the stress out of our life, right? Because what's the alternative? The alternative is to think that it's all on us, that we've got to know all the details ahead of time, and we've got to plan it all out, and we've got to know all this stuff that actually we don't know. Right? We can't know. We can't know the details. There's no way on God's earth I would have ever found this guy's garage that turned out to be one that would repair my car and lend me a car for free. I would, you know, he didn't even come up in a Google search or anything. So I wouldn't have found him. And yet there is an intelligence that knows how to take care of things. It's already taking care of everything. We think we're the exception. Which is ridiculous, really, when you really understand it. So yeah, you were asking, well, what is this understanding? What are the principles really pointing to? To me, it's that they're pointing to the fact that our intrinsic nature is wholeness, that we already are okay on the inside, because in our spiritual essence, that aspect to our beingness cannot be lost or diminished or damaged in any way. So that's one facet of it. But then it's coupled with the fact, well, you say that to someone and they say, well, yeah, but I don't always feel that that's true. Sometimes I just get myself into a terrible state. Okay, well, here's the other facet. The other facet helps you to understand how that happens. If you understand how that happens, how we get ourselves into a state, then you'll start to see that it doesn't make sense to do that anymore, because what you realize is you're doing it to yourself. And it's in the category of which I love, what Sid Banks called, it's the innocent misuse of the gift of thought.
Yeah.
It's the innocent misuse of the gift of thought. We're basically using the mind power that we've been gifted with against ourselves without realizing it. Nobody's doing that deliberately.
No.
I don't see anyone doing that deliberately. We're only doing it through misunderstanding. And as we come to understand how that actually works, and the only way we can understand it is not intellectually, but through insight, through realization. So these facets fit together to me. That's why you can't just, in a way, you can't just encapsulate the totality of the principles in like one sentence, or that you can't just talk about the power of thought to create feeling and say that's it. It's not it. That's a facet of it, but it has to be coupled with the fact that it's through realization and insight, that's how we actually come to understand it. And that also has to be coupled with the fact that we're intrinsically always okay on the inside, right? They have to kind of fit together somehow. But for most of us, there's like an entry point, that's the first we see. If you just keep following that for a little while, the other ones will naturally open up to you. And that's the beautiful thing. It's like an unfolding, isn't it? The others seem to just come in its wake in their own time. And you'll see the bit that you need to see, which is beautiful. We're not in charge of that. We don't even have to worry about that. I can share my story about, the guy having an insight to just, a realization that what he needed to do was just sit. We should just sit quietly and wait for further instructions. I can share that story, but someone listening to it will have an insight about something else.
Yes.
They'll see something about another facet, which is amazing. We're not in charge of that, what people see. Thank God. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, very good to know that it's not on our shoulders in that sense. And I know for me, one of the things with that is, because I definitely went through a phase when I first came across the principles, and I did not care whether you were interested in knowing this or not. I could see what you were innocently doing wrong, and I was going to show you and tell you and make you put that right, because it would be all the best thing for you. And I've seen quite a few people go through that sort of stage, but to actually come to the realization, no, this gift, that insight, although the insight was about my children, that gift and that insight was mine, and it was for me, and for me to come, okay, so your children are perfectly okay. You have innocently been misusing this amazing gift you have got for a long time. Why don't you turn that around? Why don't you play with this? Why don't you do something different, instead of looking at all these people and kind of, because I think that is definitely as a mom, and I know, like when I work with women and mums, we have this idea that, oh no, I can't do anything for me, I've got to do it for my kids, and it's like, well, sorry. Don't work like that. That's like, actually, you know, the insights, what you see is for you. And I know, like, the more that I realized that and thought, okay, so this is about me actually being a living example of what I am seeing. Because then what happened one by one was my children were like, what the hell happened to you, Mum? What's going on for you? Yeah, they started to recognize the huge changes. And so, you know, my two nieces, Lou and Beck, the same thing happened. And that's kind of what happened, I guess, like when you're talking about the clients and getting clients and things like that, people see who you are being, you know, and it's like, I'm a little bit curious about that. Like you say with the story, people are like, oh yeah, my car broke down, this and this. And they're saying, well, why were you not absolutely stressed to the eyeballs? Why did you not get to that Devon event, unable to do that event because you were so stressed, you know, need to go straight to the bar and have something. And then, you know, why did that not happen to you? What's going on for you?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that, yeah, exactly right. And in that sense, it's an easy sell in a way, isn't it? You know, we don't even have to, we can let go of the idea that we need to convince or persuade or, you know, tell people that they need to know this, because another facet to that, which is interesting to me, which again goes back to my homeopathic training. In homeopathy, we learn about something called susceptibility.
Okay.
It's a very powerful idea if you've never come across it, because it explains, for example, why is it when there's let's say an outbreak of flu or whatever, does everybody get the flu? No. Even if, you know, you got 6 people living under the same roof, maybe 4 of them might, but probably 2 of them won't. And do they all get it to the same degree? No. You know, and yet in Western medicine, everything pointed towards the external as being the cause. It's the virus, you know. Well, if it was the virus, and supposedly this virus is everywhere, and we're all breathing it and sharing it, why are we not all getting sick at the same time and to the same degree? It can't be what we're saying it is the causative agent. So in homeopathy, we learn about this thing called internal susceptibility, which is actually the decisive factor. If you're susceptible, you're going to get sick, even if you don't come across the damn virus. You're going to get sick anyway.
I really love that you said that. So I really want to hear more about this, because this is fascinating. So go on.
And if you're not susceptible, you can be in a room full of people coughing and sneezing, and it's like water off a duck's back. It has no effect on you. It doesn't have the capacity to affect you. So there's like this energetic, in homeopathy, we understand that in terms of energy. It's an energetic thing. It's something that's happening at a realm which is before the physical. And so from a homeopathic understanding, in order for someone to get sick, their energy has to change first. That renders them susceptible. And then that susceptibility then we draw towards us that which creates what we call the sickness. And then it manifests in a form which we recognize. Oh, now we can see the person's got sick, right? But there's a sequence of things that's happened there. Most of it happened invisibly first, and then there's the visible consequence. Now, in my mind, the principles is pointing to something that's very, very similar. And when we talk about sharing this understanding, or people being drawn to it or not, there's a susceptibility at work there too. When people are ready to hear this, they'll find it, or they'll find you, or they'll find a Sid Banks book, or they'll stumble into it somewhere. When they're not, you can preach to them till the cows come home.
Yeah.
They don't want to know. It's not for them. They're not interested. Or they might even think they're interested, but they'll spend days and months and years trying to get their head around it. And so it's not going in, because they're not susceptible. They're not. Another way of talking about susceptibility would be receptivity. We have to be receptive. We have to be receptive in order for this to touch us in such a way that it activates that which is already within us.
Okay, so yeah, I love that. It's So if you've got someone, say, for example, I was listening to this and I thought, you know, I'm struggling with something, but I've been around the principles, nothing's changed for me, nothing's going on. Is there a way I can make myself receptive or susceptible, or, you know, what can I do if I'm kind of like, yeah, this is the 50th thing I've listened to this week, and what are these principles, and how am I going to, you know, this terrible thing keeps going on in my life, whatever it is, blah, blah, blah. What can I do?
It's a great question, and it's a common scenario, right? We've encountered that, I'm sure, in different forms. I don't think you can make yourself be receptive, but let's say you can swing the odds a little bit.
I love it. I love it.
And the first way that you can swing the odds is by recognizing that what you're currently doing isn't helping. For me, that's a good starting point for anyone, to recognize that endlessly binge watching, you know, videos and webinars, there's a certain point where you realize this is stressing me out. Trying to get my head around these principles is stressing me out. Okay, there's a little clue for you there. Back off. Yeah, just back off. Give yourself a break. So that's usually, to me, that's usually the starting point of a person increasing their receptivity, is when they learn to give, they can recognize their own signal now when they're overdoing it with their mind. They're trying too hard to get it in an intellectual sense. And really what they're doing is, we're doing what Einstein says doesn't work in his famous quote. You know, he says, you cannot solve a problem at the same level of consciousness that created it. And whenever we have a problem, that's usually exactly what we try and do.
Yeah.
Right? We use the same kind of thinking that created this feeling of distress that we're in. We use that same level of thinking, level of consciousness, to try and solve it. Of course, it doesn't work. And when I first heard that from Einstein, not directly, but when I read it 20 odd years ago.
You haven't had a conversation like this with Einstein yet?
I cleverly thought, well, I know what he means. So that makes sense to me. So what he's saying is, when you have a shift in your level of consciousness, suddenly you can find a solution for the thing that you couldn't solve at a lower level. I thought, that's cool. I know what Einstein means. And then some years later, through my exploration of the principles, I suddenly realized that's not how it works. It isn't actually how it works. How it actually seems to work is, at this level of consciousness, I have a problem. When I shift to a higher level of consciousness, what I discover is that problem doesn't exist here. It's not that I find the solution for it here. It's a non-problem at this level. It was only a problem at that level. So what that tells me is that shifting level of consciousness is the currency of value. That's what it's all about. That's the only thing that ever has to happen. And that's just another way of talking about having an insight, having a realization. Is that when we have a shift in a level of consciousness, we've understood something in a new way that we didn't understand before. You go, oh yeah, now I get it. Yeah. And in a way, that is what renders us susceptible or not. You know, when we become more susceptible, when we have a realization that what we were doing wasn't helpful. Like, okay, so I'm just driving myself nuts here, trying to get my head around it. Right, that doesn't work. Okay, how about if I just stop doing that for a while and just chill out for a bit? Let's see what happens there. And lo and behold, it's amazing, because if people just forget about the principles for a while and they go back to reading novels or whatever they used to enjoy doing before, right? They just basically take that pressure off themselves. Certain point when they're not looking for it, something will sneak in. Something will sneak in.
I love how that happens. It's like you said, I know we've had clients who've even got angry with us and kind of said, I don't like your principles anymore. That's it, you know. And like, okay, you know, that's it. I'm done with your principles. I'm like, okay. And then like a while later, it's like, these principles. And it's all, yeah, there is almost like they needed to be done with it for a while.
Yeah, exactly.
To sort of, to find that chink, to find that piece of light. But it's what I also love about that is wherever we are, what I see is we are always being divinely guided. And that I had a conversation with Dominic Scafidi, and I love, he talked, I think, I don't think it came from him, but he talked about the path of least resistance. And it really feels like that sometimes, you know, when things happen for me, to me, through me, when things happen, it's like afterwards I kind of see, yeah, there's no other way you would have listened, but unless that thing. And like, I think illness and things like that are I watch people sometimes and I see, oh yeah, your suffering's not quite enough yet for you to look for something else. Oh yeah, this is going to get worse before it's, you know, you talk to someone, I think, oh gosh, yeah, you're going to get a lot worse before you get better, because that there is this, I don't know, there's something going on, but it's like, yeah, that's nowhere near bad enough yet for you to actually listen and look and, you know, and go in a different direction potentially.
That can sound harsh sometimes, you know, if we're not, again, if we're not ready to hear that, it can almost sound like you're making a judgment about where someone is. But I know that that's not the case. That's not what you're saying. It's actually something I wrote about in one of my books. I wrote a book called The Tao of Homeopathy.
Oh wow!
And Taoism, as you probably know, is an ancient Chinese approach to life. Really, it's not a system of medicine per se. It's an understanding of life, which is all to do with whether you're in flow or not. You know, if you're in Tao, you're in alignment with the natural order of things. That's really what Taoism points to. And so it's very aligned with the principles understanding. And one of the chapters in that book I wrote about was sometimes when we quite enough, the suffering will continue, you know, and it will even escalate. And for the very reason that you say, because when it's bad but not too bad, we just put up with it.
Yeah.
When it's really bad, it gets our attention. If, you know, at a certain point, it'll literally stop us in our tracks, or we just get too tired. You know, we get so exhausted that our ego finally just gives in. It just surrenders, like, okay, there literally isn't anything I can do here. Now, when we get to that point of surrender, that's usually when the door opens. You know, a little chink at least appears at that point. Again, that renders us receptive. Sometimes we have to be ground down by life a little bit more before we become receptive. I can't say that it has to be like that, because for many people it's not that the case, but for some people it is, unfortunately. But even then, you see, they tend to, at a certain point, they tend to look back with gratitude.
Yes.
You know, they can see that actually I can see now that that was the necessary path for me to take, because I wouldn't have gone there voluntarily.
Yeah, I can definitely see that for me. It was like, yeah, it had to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse until I was ready to kind of just go, oh, whatever, I just can't do this anymore. I've been taking it on my shoulders so much, and it was just like, I can't, there is no more. And yeah, then
so that's the other answer to your question. How do we make ourselves receptive? Well, just keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, don't worry, it'll get worse. Don't worry, it'll get worse. Don't worry, it'll get worse. I know we were joking about that, and I know, but what I do again, what I see in that is that divine guidance again. We are always being offered something, shown something, guided in some way, and at some point, you know, I'm guessing, you know, people who are listening to this, and if they've stayed this long and they're listening, it's kind of like, yeah, there is so much hope, there is so much. It's just, I love being a part of this conversation. I love I love being around this. I just, it lifts me up so much, and it gives me so much hope for what's possible.
Yeah, and I think, and the other thing, if someone is genuinely open and curious, if they've got to that point where they say, look, I'm not getting it, but I know there's something in it.
Yes. Yeah.
They've already kind of got over the first hurdle, so to speak. They're not dismissing it. They're not writing it off. They haven't just pigeonholed it as, you know, it's just another form of NLP or something like that. They know enough to know that it's not, that there's something else here. But so there's a genuine little curiosity avenue has started to open up. At that point, for me, the best thing that I can offer is to say to that person, listen for what resonates. Pay attention to what resonates and ignore everything else.
Yes.
And what am I really saying there is basically only read the books that interest you. Don't think you have to read all of them. Only listen to the teachers that you actually enjoy listening to. That, you know, the way that they speak about it actually makes sense to you. Don't try and get your head around the ones where you're not even enjoying listening to it, you know, If there's something jarring, if it jars and it sounds off, leave that one. That's for somebody else. It's not for you. But if there's one that when you listen to that person, even if you don't understand what they're saying, after you've listened to them for a while, you feel a bit calmer, or it's just settled you down a little bit, or you just enjoy it as background noise. Do much more of that.
I love that. Yeah, yeah.
Listen to me, that's listening for what resonates, and because that's how homeopathy works. It's all about resonance. We've got to find the right frequency that resonates for us. So then we're using susceptibility in a positive way. See, it's not just about drawing things towards us that make us sick. It's also drawing things towards us which are the remedy for us, right? Because we're also susceptible to that. We're susceptible to the thing that we need as for the next stage of our growth and our evolution. And it's very individual. It's always individually tailored for each of us at any given stage. So we can't prescribe it for someone else in a kind of routine way. Well, this worked for me, therefore you should do what I did. That won't help anybody. So to me, the most helpful thing we can say to someone is, have you noticed that when you listen to a whole bunch of stuff, maybe just one of them jumps out at you and you really enjoy it, or it seems to ring true? It's like, actually, yeah, there was one. Okay, pay attention to that. That's the one for you.
Yeah.
You can probably ignore that other 50,
I love that. I love that because, and I think we're so blessed to have so many amazing and beautiful people speak in this way, that it is so good to just go, yeah, if something resonates with you, find out more about that, follow that, because yeah, that is. And I love how we are all individual in this, how we come across it, how we see it, the insights we have, what we share. It's just it's so lovely that we get all that. And I think I love that it's not, I know certainly for me as well, in the early days, it was easy to look back at the story of maybe things that I had done and think, oh, well, maybe that's the way to do it. And then to have that realization, no, it's not what you did, and it's not the story of it. It's that resonance, that openness. And again, to me, that is coming back to the core of it, the foundations of it, and that this is within that person. This isn't something, it's not about what I did or what you did. It's about what was the source of what you did? What was the source of that? And go back to source, rather than, because innocently and accidentally, it's very, very easy to kind of say, oh gosh, yeah, you're healthy now, or you're successful in business now, or whatever. So what did you do? Let me do the same things. And it's like, it might not be the same. It probably won't be the same for someone else. So
no, you're right. We get enamored with the messenger, or even with the message.
Yes. Yeah.
And what we're missing there is like, no, wait a minute, there was something upstream of that, which that person was tapping into in their way, but you can tap into it in your way.
Yes. Yeah.
We're all tapped into it. And actually that's the only way that will touch you, and that will move you and will give you your own insight. In some sense, it has to be individually realized. It has to be. People say to me, well, if this was as good as people think it is, why isn't everybody know it, right? People have been saying the same thing to me about homeopathy for decades.
Yes.
And the answer is actually the same in both cases. Homeopathy also has to be individually realized. Until people realize it, it just doesn't make sense. It must be just placebo. They just write it off, right? And it's the same with the principles. If someone hasn't had an insight about it, it's easy to write it off, or to put it in a category of, it's just like this. It's just mindfulness, or it's CBT or positive thinking or whatever. And yet there's this niggling sense that I think there might be something else in it, but I don't know what it is. But when you have a realization about it, then you know what you know. No one can take that away from you. And that's what we call grounding. And it feels like you're on solid ground then. It's the difference between believing in something versus actually knowing it. When you really know something, you don't have to believe in it at all. I think I've come to realize we only believe in the things we're not really sure about.
And it's a kind of, yes, I'm going to make myself believe in it. I'm going to make it. Yeah, but I love that. I love that. So I will put something underneath this video anyway. But if anyone, anyone who's watching this who has resonated with some of what you have said and want to know more about you, what's the best and easiest way to find you?
The Insight Space is the name of my website, and that's probably the best place that they can go. There's lots of free stuff on there as well, you know, videos and audios and articles and stuff like that. So yeah, the insightspace.com is probably the easiest place.
Thank you so much. That has just been, I've really, really enjoyed that conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I've enjoyed it too, Debs, and happy to be part of your celebration this year.
Yes, celebrating my birthday for an entire year. Thank
Wonderful.
you.